Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and to say a little bit about Shell's views about the future of the global gas markets, but also actually highlight the challenges of frontier environments. And I hope to bring a few more frontiers than actually normally we discussed. It's a very broad topic, so I've been asked to really concentrate on the gas side of this topic. But of course, we'll also be active in many other of the frontier areas, which I'm happy to address later, say in the discussions. I will start off this presentation by giving a few global perspectives of the role of natural gas as a backbone of the future energy system, and rather than say maybe as a temporary backup, as some people may believe, before renewables take over. And I will end with a few key challenges the industry, the policymakers and the public will face, ensuring security of supply for economic growth, while balancing a number of important other issues, not the least climate change. I think I have to get right. That's the. So the first frontier is maybe not technical. It's really a demand frontier, I would call it. It's really the accelerating demand from the non-OECD. Future demand in the OECD will probably be flattish, but all real energy growth will be in the non-OECD. In Shell we have a long history about predicting the future, but we like to do it in scenario terms, so multiple futures, because it has proven very hard indeed to predict a single future. But one thing you can say for sure, and that is the world will need more energy, driven by population and prosperity growth, and that is a kind of unstoppable process. So we will have a third more people from today by 2050, from 7 to 9.3 billion. 75% of that will live in cities by then, 50%, that's twice the amount of people like now. So the nature of demand is changing. And people will be 3 to 4 times richer than today on average, which also means more demand for energy. Very roughly speaking, as from today, we need about 50% more energy, but over the next 2 decades, we also need 40% more food and water. Those are emerging issues for our industry as well to deal with, especially when we go into the biofuel domain. At the same time, of course, we have the aspirations to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions on a global scale of around 80% to meet a 2 degrees political target for climate change. So this is quite some challenges, and we really have to do much better than we did in the past. We have to halve our energy intensity of economies, and also we need about 3 times more renewables as we have today. Just to say a little bit about the global energy system as a whole, which is the left-hand side of the picture. While renewables, yes, may grow very fast, it's still the coming decades, the age of the hydrocarbons. We need more oil, gas and coal, I'm afraid, to make that economic engine turn and actually to be able to build alternative energy systems. And yes, the alternative energy system will have to grow spectacularly. And the growth figures will be much more exciting than maybe say our growth figures. But still, the size of the scale is quite different. And I think that I like to stress here one particular point, and that's actually that people might overestimate how fast things can change in our energy system. It takes about 3 decades, from a new emerging technology to reach about 1–2% market share, which is about a share where it can stand on its own feet. But in the meantime, in these 3 decades, it will probably need a couple of $100 billion of government subsidies or support or in other forms to actually reach that competitive level so this industry can compete. And then it takes another 3 decades to really reach market maturity, being at the market share of say 10, 20, whatever the natural market share is. So really, to change energy system is a generational game. We already have made our decisions for the energy system for our children and grandchildren. So that is really driving why we will need more oil and gas in the future. Now, on oil, we really need, say, in the next to 2030, about 30% more. That's a great challenge. The IEA has, in Paris, have said many times, what is that challenge? But just to think of that, you need about 6 North Seas in these coming years, just to actually to make that growth happen. And underlying, of course, is the decline of existing fields. And that means you need every 3 to 4 years another Saudi Arabia, another 10 million barrels just to stand still. That's to compensate for underlying decline. These are huge challenges indeed, and it will cost a lot of money. The IEA in Paris estimates about 400 billion a year. That's about every 2 weeks the Olympic budget spent just on oil. Yes, there are recent successes by finding new oil provinces in the non-OPEC, like liquid-rich shales, pre-salt deep water. They all will help, but new frontiers, say the Arctic, etc., will also be required to maintain the crude production levels for non-OPEC. The world also really trusts or assumes that a lot of future growth will come from the OPEC countries itself, about 10 million barrels more in the next 2 decades. That's implicit in all these projections. And if you then have a look where this growth has to come from, that will be Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and Venezuela. So I think it's very wise to actually look at some frontier acreage and exploration to have more resilience of the energy system. Quite often the world is looking at IOCs to do the job, especially in this part of the world. But let me remind you that 75% of the global resources in oil are in the hands of the NOCs. And the other 25%, only 7% of that is freely accessible for competing IOCs like our own company. And the other part, you need, say, special partnerships with NOCs and IOCs. So again, we have to develop that route further there. And then I think the oil in the frontier areas is quite often Arctic. We are very active in that. We try to drill 2 exploration wells this year. And USGS estimates about 60 billion barrels is there already found, another 130 billion to be found. That's about 10% of the remaining reserves. So a real sensible price to go after. So let me turn to gas. Now, I say for oil it's a good story, 30% growth to 2030, but for gas it's even better story. We believe that it will grow about 50% to 2030 and probably double today's demand by 2050. A huge challenge indeed. Now, US and EU markets will probably grow in the 2030 about 20% more or less, but China will really be the highest growth market, maybe more than 4 times today's market. And that brings it on par with the European market. This is an enormous challenge to satisfy that demand over there. But also countries like India will catch up there, and they may grow 5 times in that period to about 2/3 of the Chinese levels. Again, similar levels of investments will be required in the gas as for oil, about 380 billion a year. So gas really has a bright future indeed, in our opinion. It is acceptable, abundant, and affordable. In power generation, capital costs are the lowest of all, and even when you take fuel and operation costs in considerations, it remains a very attractive option indeed. The immediate environmental benefits, as said many times, but definitely the air quality in cities are much cleaner when you use gas-fired generation, as was very well demonstrated by the Beijing Olympics. And additional benefit of gas is that it actually has half the CO2 emissions as a coal-fired power station. And that is actually, you can do now without any extra subsidies to reduce CO2 emissions from today. The renewable route is also, of course, possible, but that's much more expensive. So in our scenario analysis, we have many different sensitivities in there, but really it becomes more and more clear that actually that gas is a real backbone of the energy system of the future. It really enables electrification route in the transport sector. So if you want to decarbonize the transport sector, going for electrification is a good one. And you reduce thereby the emissions, but also you enhance the efficiency overall very much. And this carbon capture and storage, gas-fired power generation will really be part of that decarbonized future, and will certainly be, well, most likely be cheaper per megawatt hour than for coal to do that. So the last thing I like to highlight on the benefits of gas in electricity is the operational flexibility for gas. It can really deal much better with the intermittency of the renewables, which will grow fast in the future. And I think that a sufficient share of gas in the electricity system may prove much more acceptable and cost-effective than expanding overhead transmission lines to level renewable output over great distances. There's a lot of NIMBYism there where people don't want all these pylons in the backyards or through nature to achieve that. And like I say, it will take quite a few decades before renewables will be any size to actually make a dent in the supply for electricity. Now, the breakthrough of unconventional gas in North America and huge resource potential across the globe, now estimated to be double than it was before, is really a game changer and can make really that gas the destination fuel. The IEA quotes that say China could have 1.5 times the US reserves, Mexico and Argentina almost the same as US. Countries like South Africa, Canada, Australia may have about 50% of US unconventional resources. And also here in Europe, of course, is quite of potential. In France and Poland predominantly, but I must say, if allowed. Now in the UK, the unconventional gas play is really emerging. There's a lot of a huge range there in uncertainty, so range from a couple of TCF of unconventional gas potential to 20 TCF of even higher. Some people dream of 100 TCF. But if it would be successful, it could could increase the domestic gas production in 2030 by around 50% and reduce the import requirements about 1/5. So really a prize to go after for the UK. And this is a very optimistic case, I realize that, and many challenges have to be overcome. But of course, there's always the import option, the LNG option is there. We expect as well that the LNG production in the world will grow very strongly, so we can compete for that as well. But I guess the domestic option will be very attractive. Just to give you a few examples of frontiers for natural gas here. I think it's really a game changer and pushing the boundaries there, because the natural gas market is really rapidly changing. A number of LNG importers, for instance, are finding its way, and also LNG finding its way in transportation. Now, here is an example of Sakhalin 2. It's been one of the largest integrated gas projects in the world. It was a first for Russia to enter the LNG market and enter the Asia-Pacific markets. Pearl GTL in Qatar is a really great opportunity to actually enter with gas resources the oil market and actually maximize value there for the country. And the floating LNG is really new technology to mop up a lot of stranded gas out there, very far away offshore, where it doesn't really make sense to bring pipelines onshore. And we believe that something like 7 or 8 TCM, trillion cubic meter of gas, otherwise stranded, could be exploited this way. And then, of course, LNG in trucking and shipping is new markets to be explored. Certainly in America, it has a big impetus because of the gas-oil price differential, so there's a great economic incentive there. But also, say, in Europe, there's an economic incentive, and of course, it's much better in environmental performance as well in the sense. So let me round off really with this last slide on the challenges we face as an industry. I like to stress is the world is becoming more and more integrated and complex, and energy systems are no different. This poses particular challenges in governance, not only to manage energy security at affordable cost, but also managing unintended consequences. For companies, this means balancing many objectives while satisfying markets and shareholders' expectations, which is normally much more short-term in that sense. Societal expectations are becoming much higher and higher. And beside the normal expectation of sufficient energy at any time at low prices, more and more people demand cleaner energies and more sustainable energies. And also tolerances for mistakes have become much less post-Macondo, and the liabilities much higher. And actually it does matter to people on the other end of the world what we do here or elsewhere. The world is more interconnected. And like we experience, say, in exploring the Arctic, there's a real enormous community program underlying that to get the buy-in to actually be able to explore in these frontier acreage. The technical challenges are evident, and it's predominantly that there's increasingly complex fields of further away areas like ultra-deep water and Arctic, while increasing our safety performance is key. I think our industry has done a reasonably good job so far in that, but we can always do better. And you really see that in this field, the industry is really stepping up on this at the moment. And related to that is this environmental footprint. We are more and more get scrutinized, not just say delivering sustainable energies, but also, okay, what is your land use? What is your emission profiles? And people want us to be transparent about that and actually do and reduce those footprints. Now, the political and regulatory uncertainties around access to resources remain key. And public protest around unconventional gas extraction techniques, prompting knee-jerk reaction by some governments, highlight the issue that the industry has to help itself by actually taking a leading role to making, say, extraction of unconventional gas more acceptable. And that means just more transparency. Show what you're doing, have this engagement with communities. And in Shell, we published in response to the fracking concerns the 5 onshore operating principles. And just there are a few, I don't want to go through them all, but I think the most important one is that we really design, construct and operate our wells and facilities in a safe and responsible way. And how to do that? Well, before we begin, we construct safety cases. This is really common in the UK. This actually started here, but it's not all over the world the same. So there's again, you know, where the UK played a leading role and actually where it will be seen in the continuing in other parts of the world. So we have, in response, we published our operating principles, and also we're doing the same now with Arctic operating principles, and we work with industry, NGOs and other stakeholders really to make them better and publish them. And we engage with local communities, and maybe that's another frontier, but really where we have to do better and better in the future. Now, just to say a few more words that actually the industry actually being part of the regulation and actually have to help there is because of the increasing complexity. Now, no single entity can oversee it all, so you really have to work together in there. And in that sense, we are very pleased that we've seen that the IEA in Paris have taken a leading role in this area by pulling this expertise together in industry and in the public and private sector and published their golden rules for the golden age of gas report, which is, I hope, the first step till we see more where we can actually build on that. So just to round off, I hope I made a good plea for that gas will be an integral part of the future energy system, that it will not just be a bridging fuel till renewables come in, but really it's a backbone of that future energy system. And be part of delivering that security of supply and that resilience the energy system needs. This will not come by itself, and our industry will need to play a leading role, as I said, rather than a passive one. Policymakers and society in general should not underestimate that technical and financial regulatory challenge to deliver this. Especially in Europe, I think still more can be done by clear policy steers and to give industry and financiers the confidence to go after these exploration areas and develop new fields. In return, I think the industry must accept high regulatory environmental standards and work with governments as well as actively engaging all key stakeholders to overcome the challenges I mentioned. Thank you very much for your attention.